All right. All right, folks, we're going to ask Ish to show himself tonight.
And
He
Ish
has
is
not
gonna.
been revealing himself for a long time, and we're sick of it. We want to see Ish. Make sure you put in the comments that you wish to see Ish, because after all, we're on that Ish, aren't we?
Yeah, yeah. We'll see what the comments demand.
Mm-hmm.
We'll review this video in post, and we'll see the comments demand Ish to come out of Ghost.
Yeah, I think either way, the folks do want to see you, so you should reveal thyself. So, what were we last talking about
I
before
don't
you
know.
decided to bless us with your voice?
I think I was on some rant about love.
Mm-hmm. I think it was a bit more specific.
Oh, I don't know. I was saying that I wish our people had the spirit of love and perseverance that the percentage of our people had during the civil rights movement.
Right. You were talking about the percentage of our people because there were less people back then.
Yes,
The
yes,
population was smaller.
yes.
So, I
And
mean, my
even the
thing
amount of
is,
people that actually put themselves on Front Street for that particular movement. Not that people weren't suffering across the country, you know what I mean? But there were people who proactively made choices to.
well, yeah, I mean, if we're talking about the Montgomery bus boycott, I mean, surely in droves and numbers, we all had to get together and, put ourselves on the line to some extent, right?
Yep,
There had to be a lot of participation in order for that to work.
yep,
So my thing is that there are different levels of participation and organizing that we're talking about, and what it looks like for communities to get together, to stand together, and to show that spirit of love for each other. For instance, you know, unions came to prevalence as the years went by, and then there were certain peaks and valleys that we saw. But like, if you were in a union, you knew what it was like to strike, and that could be putting yourself, your job, and your family at risk, um, and putting the food on the table at risk, right? So people involved in unions know what it's like to sacrifice. So even outside of, say, a big political civil rights movement like we had in the 60s, as long as maybe unions and other things were still going on, we might have felt that there were other times where that energy was being replicated in different ways. Um, I mean, I guess surely when the energy and the focus and the leadership is centralized, it feels easier, or like it was easier back then, to get everyone to follow, you know, some of these great leaders that we had, if that's what we're talking about. But getting back to what I was mentioning before, I think I was talking to you before about the meeting that my work had with Jane Fonda. She was talking about how there's so much love in today's movements that she's seeing in like BLM uh, movements, where other folks, what she described as lily white folks and other folks, are happily marching with us, putting their bodies on the line, where, what she saw back in the time of the Black Panthers was, it was a lot more standoffish. It was, we're going to do for ourselves, kind of discouraging, other groups of people from joining. So in some ways, uh, there's definitely a lot of love nowadays. She also spoke about how BLM was started by Black women and also Black non-binary folks, and how asking folks to take care of themselves. I think she saw a flyer that had a rundown of, are you taking care of yourself, et cetera, that touched her. She hadn't really seen that before. And she talked about how, women were able to touch on different aspects of the movement than men were, and that how women have used um, a collaborative effort throughout the years to get things done, whether it was like uh, what do you call that, when the men were out hunting and women were uh, gathering, how they kind of put their efforts together, and really how they provided the sustenance for their families, because hunting was often futile and meat wasn't often gathered. So it was more often the gatherers. Meat wasn't often hunted, rather. It was more often the gatherers that provided the sustenance, because they were much more effective, and they just like learned to kind of collaborate together. And then she started making connections between sewing circles and book clubs and all of these social type gatherings that count on people to get together and be interconnected. And she was just kind of like making a connection between all of those social things and the movements of today, and how they manifest. So yeah, one might say that there's lots of love, and that it's even expanded nowadays to true allies, and to folks who were embracing, who can really help.
So while I don't argue that at all. I think before we got on air, I think I was really, though, my comparison or my wish was for it to be on community levels.
Say again.
My wish was that we saw that on local communal levels.
Okay, can you expand on that?
Oh, like, in the neighborhoods,
Okay.
in smaller communities. I think that's really where it starts. And I don't, disagree with her. I don't at all disagree with her. I think that when you talk about movements, right, these are things that you see, but
Mm-hmm.
especially in the 21st century, because everything is so, it's like every few years there's a new thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, I don't want to downplay anything that we're seeing today, because even I'm astounded, and I said as much, early on this year. Even I'm astounded by some of the things that I'm seeing. But my fear is, if we don't begin, if this, like, so what we get is the grand effect, and we kind of skip the stages, right, on the lowest levels, that it's like we skipped to this result and we missed a lot of stages. So I wonder, and my fear is that what we're seeing now begins to fizzle out, and we go back to some type of norm, right? Where, like, so on a grand stage, we're seeing, love being evidenced, and, allies and people coming together that hadn't otherwise come together, even though they always said that they were together,
Mm-hmm.
right? There wasn't really a real sense of unity,
Okay.
meaning, you know, I'm going to see you out marching for the same reasons that I'm marching for, protesting for the same reasons that I'm protesting for, that I'm going to see you supporting why I'm conducting myself a certain way or fighting for a certain thing. Like, I normally you could hear it, especially in the social media era, right? You see people, I call it emoji speak. You see people having the conversation and saying that they support certain thing, but do I really see you? Right? Do you really see me? And I'll even put that on us too, where you have, not not everybody, but a large percentage of people who certainly want certain things and speak out against certain things, but you know, that's what it is. Like I'm speaking out against a certain thing, or I want certain things, but you know, so you know, I don't want to discount what we're seeing because I
Hmm.
think it's awesome, and I'm impacted by it, and it's touching me.
Yeah.
But I would be remiss if I didn't say that I feel like we skipped some steps, or at least if we didn't skip steps, if some sense of urgency meant that we had to get to where we are now, because
Hmm.
where we are now isn't a good place. My fear is that without it being reinforced by a strong foundation on the lowest levels, will it just go away?
And what steps do you feel we skipped?
I mean, I think so. We have this overarching sense of unity, but then on a communal level, we don't have that. Like on the lowest levels, we don't have that. And that's what I mean. Like we don't have that. There's not a foundation of it on the lowest levels. I think where we're at is necessary, but I don't know. And I don't know because only the future will tell me if by this time next year, everyone's back to some sort of norm.
So what do you mean on the lowest levels and the
Again, I keep saying communities
yeah,
in
I
the
know,
in
but I'm just
neighborhoods.
saying like expand like more. What do you mean like
Like
community?
nobody cares about what happens to the person next door to them or down the street. You can
Okay.
walk down the block and no one you can walk down the block and go to the corner store. You can send your kid to the corner store and you know, five people are going to be standing out there willing to sell them something. And
Okay.
I'm not even pointing the finger at the people that's willing to sell them something. I'm not pointing the finger at them either. Like we're all a part of this community, so I don't discount you. I don't
Okay.
want you to go away. I'm not. One thing I would never say is we got to get rid of gangs, huh?
Right.
We have to work with the
Yeah.
people in our community. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And engage and incorporate the people in our communities. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? Like I'm not one of those people. All the gang. That's not me. You're here. You're part of my community too, and something puts you in a position by which that is necessary. You're doing something that is necessary for your continued existence.
Hmm.
Something wrong inherently in this area or this community.
Right.
Something that while some of these things are systemic and they need to be addressed, we certainly can come together. And again, in that spirit that I was saying that the percentage of people who had during Civil Rights Act, we can come together and we can make some sacrifices and we can begin to love each other practically. And what I mean by not, I mean, you know, I was saying this before, practically and not idealistically. Practically, how do we love each other? How do we take this thing called love that is sweeping the nation and causing people to align? How do we take it on the lowest levels and implement it practically? And I don't know the answers, but I know that 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 if this is something that people are seeing, then I know it is a tool. That I know
Okay.
it can be used. I know
So
we can manifest it practically.
I know that some of the things that we talk about in the work that I do, or some of the things that we talk about when trying to like build up power from the ground up is creating community. Um, whether we're like, you know, whether we're like going door to door and talking to people about a mission or about talking about ideals that we have or things that we want to change in the community and bringing people together to fight those things, or whether we're training people in the communities to run for city council to fight for certain things that they want in their own communities, and showing people how to, you know, run for office, raise their own money, reach out to their community for help, you know, knocking on doors, like just training a whole grassroots effort. While we're doing this, you know, we're eating with people, maybe going out, you know, from time to time, you know, just like breaking bread and like hanging out with people who we end up loving, right? So there we can kind of like get in our communities and kind of learn about our communities, right? Like when I was in Philly for months, one thing I got to do was like knock doors on my own street and the adjacent street that I was living in and really see my neighborhood a little bit different, right? It was all of a sudden, it wasn't like some area I had just been dropped in that felt strange. It was like, oh, okay, I had conversations, one-on-one conversations with a bunch of these people, and now I might see them out and about and be like, oh, hey, what's up, you know? So we can create community in certain ways. Like we can be intentional about it. But I definitely agree with you that it's a lot different when you know your neighbors and when you have a vested interest and when your kids are saying hello to the owners of the bodega and you know who's hanging out where and you know people's names and their mothers and their fathers and brothers and whatchamacallit, you know? It's different when it's a community and it's not just an area where you reside and pay rent and like, you know, just rest your head.
Right. You know, these which what you know, that what it's foundational, right?
Yeah.
Like it creates a foundation of strength
Hmm.
that we can always stand on.
And it's like ownership too, you know, like you take pride in your community. Like, you know, there are lots of communities that they just keep their area clean out of like pride, you know. You don't
Mhm.
see like a bunch of trash and dirt up and down the streets and whatnot, but you see people that take pride in their community and together, you know, you'll see people sweeping up and just like doing things for each other, like salting the steps and doing things as a community.
Right. 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 You hit the nail on the head. It's not just somewhere where I reside and pay mortgage or pay rent.
Hmm.
You know, I'm going to take it outlandish here, but why not? We can do it. It's our show. You know, in what would be considered, some zombie apocalypse scenario, right? That's
Hmm.
kind of what you're going to be reduced to, right? Communities that have to depend on each other. Like you're my neighbor. You live
Right.
next door to me. You know what I mean? You
Yeah.
live 2 or 3 houses down. You live the next block over. You understand what I'm saying? Or
Hmm.
any of those scenarios. I just used the zombie apocalypse because that's just the first thing that came to mind. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But in extremis, you're going to be forced into a certain in that situation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, well, we don't have to have some predicament by which we're forced. You know what I mean? Like we already have the predicament, right?
Right.
On some level, we're in the predicament. It's
Right.
systemic, right? Like we live in a systemic zombie apocalypse, so to speak.
Yeah.
There is a percentage of people that are eating the wealth of of the many. You
Hmm.
know what I mean?
Sure.
So it's literally like a systemic zombie apocalypse. We are in the predicament.
And the other predicament is proximity. You know, if you live that close to people, you have that much more opportunity to get to know people.
Yep.
You know, whereas if Farmer John is a mile and a half down the road, it's going to be harder to get to know them like that. I mean, unless you know are taking that time to get over there, but you're only going to be over there so much that far away.
No, go on. I like everything you're saying. Always the voice of reason.
No, I mean that's pretty much it. That's just, I mean that's where I kind of landed, was just using proximity and interest in your neighbors, um, as a way to get to know them. Like for instance, you know, you could create like a neighborhood, you could create like a building organization or association where you get together and you address what's going on in your building. Oh, you know, the hot water hasn't been working that well. Let's all of us, you know, uh, let's all of us write to 311 at the same time, like email 311 at the same time, or like situations really messed up in our building. Let's all of us take the actions we need to put our money in a certain account where it's accounted for, but we're withholding the rent, all of us. And we're doing it legally, and we know the course of action, and we know how to prove it.
And that's simple. That's just, you have to get an escrow account.
But you have to organize your community first.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Hello? What's that?
This is what we do, folks.
Oh, hold on for a second.